Hello, I'm Jim Tolles. I'm a spiritual teacher. I blog regularly at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. And today I'll be talking about how to choose the right healer, which is, I just think, a really, really important topic to get into. Very often, people are kind of going to the wrong people for different types of issues. And I see it a lot in the different emails that I get, and that's part of the genesis of this topic, because I feel like it's important to talk a little bit more about where you go for support. And because when we get the right support, we can do a lot of good. And if we don't get the right support, it potentially, I suppose, could cause harm, but generally speaking, it's kind of ineffectual. So that's going to be the topic of tonight. And if somebody could just type a quick hello into the chat pod to let me know that you can hear me, I'd appreciate it before I launch off into this particular topic. For anyone who's new and is just joining me, there should be a chat pod on the right-hand side if you're on a desktop. I'm not exactly sure what would be on your phone. Someone would have to tell me where that would be. But that's a means of being able to communicate and chit-chat back and forth about different questions. Thanks for the comment, Karen. So in general, I'll free flow for about 20 or 30 minutes, sharing what intuitively comes to me on this particular topic. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions, and I encourage you to please focus your questions and comments to me and not amongst each other. It's such a small space that if everybody's talking amongst each other, then I can't find people's questions. In general, I encourage you to take a few deep breaths and allow yourself to relax into the space. The more we relax, the better we think. That just seems to be the nature of human beings. If you want to not think clearly, don't relax. Be really tense, be really scared, and then your brain power goes pretty much nowhere. And in general, that's one of the ways that we learn to listen to our intuition, is by being relaxed and practicing being in the space of presence, to allow ourselves to receive a moment, to really see it for what it is rather than getting caught up in our ideas about what we want it to be. As I said, take a few minutes just breathing and relaxing, getting yourself comfortable as we make a little space for people to sign on. And when I talk about healers today, I'm including spiritual teachers in it. Everybody's a little bit different as far as spiritual teachers go. For me, healing is part of the work I do. It's not the whole of the work that I do. And actually, lately, I've been really emphasizing to a lot of my students that there's a whole other world after healing. This spiritual growth that I've been blogging a lot about. One of my more recent posts, I'm talking about unobstructed spiritual growth and the way that we grow, but we start to lose reference points. We're used to things being difficult, and we're used to having a sense of some sort of friction to give us a sense of like we're expanding, we're doing better. It's like the no pain, no gain idea that, that pain, that difficulty is often a way where we decide that we're doing better, that we're progressing. Well, as we go, we start to lose those ideas and we start to lose the friction. We're not really fighting ourselves anymore. That's part of healing, as we resolve a lot of issues where we were fighting ourselves. And then things start flowing. And that's a very different space to be in. And that's a very different space to be in with a spiritual teacher, because now we're not working on an issue. While I talk about healing tonight, I'm going to be talking a lot more focused on issues and resolving those things. And that's like healing a broken bone. I'm sure many of you are getting sick of this metaphor because I use it so often. But when you're healing a broken bone, you're doing a specific set of healing. And then once it's healed and you've rehabbed, what you can do with a functional leg is very different. So you have more freedom, not just in walking, but in the things that you could potentially do, running and jumping and things like that. And that's actually an opportunity for all sorts of growth that you don't have to do. Where the healing is much more necessary if you want to be functional. You don't have to learn how to jump or sprint, right? That's now more optional. And I think that optionality is an interesting thing that can be very different for a lot of people. And it's a very different way to choose to work with someone like myself because we're so used to only thinking we have to have a problem and we have to have an end goal to get through that problem. And there's, as I said, a whole other world of space in spiritual growth and connecting with someone like myself on the spiritual teaching side of things, where we can explore and expand in ways that are actually surprisingly easy at times. To slightly change the metaphor, if you think about how grass naturally grows when the sun is out, that's another element, another way to think of spiritual growth, that here's just this energy, this extra energy, and the sunlight being, that sort of shared presence of myself and a student that allows things to just naturally grow and do their thing. And when you're watching grass, it doesn't look like it's doing much, right? But if you come back after a couple of weeks, you'll start to notice, wow, this thing's really getting bigger and growing. So that's kind of life after healing. Today's topic, as I said, is how to choose the right healer. And one last other note is I do these talks every 2 weeks. The next one will be at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. And I announce these through my newsletter. If you're not signed up to the newsletter, you can just go to my blog, spiritualawakeningprocess.com. And it's on the left-hand side, or it's in the little menu button that you click on that to get to it, and you can sign up. How to choose the right healer. How to choose the right healer, it's definitely an art and not a science, because most of the time we're not always completely clear about what the issue is we're working on. In the metaphor of the broken leg, we're much more clear than most. But obviously, in the work that I share with people, we get into some interesting subtle places. Even if those subtle places have not so subtle impacts on us, they're not necessarily something we identify particularly easily at times. For example, let's say there's just a lot of built up self-hatred inside of somebody, and they've just exhausted themselves by doing tons of things to make themselves feel better, make themselves feel like they're not hating themselves, and their body is kind of broken down in some way, that maybe it's a lot of fatigue, maybe their sleep is all disrupted because they've been so agitated and scared. So it may not be immediately clear what is the issue, and depending on how somebody is paying attention to themselves or how little they pay attention to themselves, they just think, well, I don't have enough energy. Right? So where do I go to get more energy, sort of a thing. And we do this all the time with sugar and caffeine and things like that, and the different energy drinks, which are very concerning to me because I feel like people are really imbalancing themselves to do more. And even if somebody understands that there's a self-hate issue at work, it may not necessarily be clear, well, how do you handle that? What do you really do with that? Saying that, I just want to encourage everybody to be willing to explore, willing to have a little bit of trial and error as you're trying to decide what are you actually working on and what's the best way to get there with it. I often like to divide people into 4 main categories: the head, the heart, the body, and the energy. And while they're obviously interconnected and ultimately it's all one, it seems to be a useful way to divide up people and to really start to look at our own issues. And it's something you can bring into journaling and that particular spiritual practice to see what's really going on. Starting with yourself, to take stock before jumping out into the world of healers and trying to get them to fix you, which is a problem. And we'll talk more about that mentality being very problematic, going to someone to have them fix you. With anything to do with the mind, we need to learn how to be honest with ourselves. That's kind of the fundamental part of it, because there's going to be so many ways that we're used to fooling ourselves. If we can't be honest about the things we already know, then we're not going to get anywhere. And that can be very problematic for people. It's a way that people get stuck in loops, so they're going round and round dealing with the same issue over and over because they just won't be honest with themselves. So for instance, if somebody doesn't really want to be honest with themselves, that they grew up in a very difficult family situation and that family does not support them and causes them more pain anytime they're around, then we really can't go any further into dealing with the issue because the person's in denial. They're saying, oh no, it's not that bad, it's okay, or I have to have them in my life, right? All these different beliefs that can kind of build up and cause somebody to actively ignore the truth of that situation. And of course, if somebody's still in that situation, it becomes more difficult to get any sort of perspective or space to figure out what you're feeling and to find other viewpoints to help you see other more healthy ways to be or to think. So self-honesty is just so critical as you start to look at your thoughts, the patterns of your thoughts, what you focus on, what you think is important, how you treat yourself mentally. I mean, a lot of people treat themselves very poorly mentally, because they don't think they're good enough, they're hating themselves, they're constantly scared or anxious about something. These types of things, you need to start to pay attention to, like, what's actually happening in my mind. And if you've never done any work on this level, this is probably where a psychologist would be really helpful. Somebody that is what I essentially call a mind healer. And certainly there are really great and progressive psychologists out there who are willing to forge off into levels of emotionality and physicality, somatic work, that type of stuff. And it really just depends who you find. In general, though, the purview of the psychologist, from my vantage point, is the mind, to help you be able to understand yourself. And there's all sorts of interesting therapies and things like that. And I know a lot of people get nervous around the whole taking medication, but unless something is really severe, and we can talk about that in a moment too, there's a lot of choice there. For the most part, I don't know that psychologists can make you, or psychiatrists, because they're the ones who can prescribe drugs, can make you do anything you don't want to do. So there's no harm in going and having a session with one of them and talking to them, and getting some perspective on what's going on at the level of the mind. Now, when we get into more serious mental health issues, this is an important place to go to, a psychologist and a therapist, to get supported. A lot of times people want to shy away from it, and I'm not going to say medication is good or bad. I can say that when somebody's really unstable, it's difficult to do any deeper level of work, and that medication, when it's used correctly, helps to stabilize somebody, helps them to be calm enough to be able to handle any other kind of deeper processing that goes on. So if anybody has this idea that medication is bad, we need to throw that idea out. We need to let it go entirely. There are other beliefs that hide underneath that sort of a belief. That's not a core belief. That's something that grows up out of other fears and concerns. And spirituality embraces everything. Everything is a tool in front of you. And that is something I really want to encourage you to think of as far as choosing the right healer for yourself, that there's lots of different healers, lots of different modalities. They're all at your disposal. And part of this is really getting to know yourself and to find the right support. So thus far I'm talking mainly about the intellect and helping somebody see differently, but obviously the heart can't be ignored. And a good psychologist can work there too, and as well as other types of therapists, to help somebody start to understand what they feel and to acknowledge what they feel. I mean, some people are so shut down emotionally that just being able to talk and express emotions is a huge step. And therapists are a great first step in doing that. When we get to the body, I think it's always really, really important that if there are physical issues going on, that you do check with a Western doctor. Sometimes people are coming to me and they're asking me about, fatigue, this chronic fatigue, and I talk about it a lot because there's some interesting ways where we can be physically fine and have no energy, and that was something I experienced a lot of for several years after awakening, as things were changing inside and I was having triggers come up that were depleting me in interesting and uncomfortable ways. But there was nothing physically wrong at the time with me. And I was fortunately aware enough of the spiritual path and what was happening inside to know that. And anytime I went to a doctor, nothing was ever wrong. So that's something to be very mindful of as a step one. That if lots of physical things are happening, go towards Western MDs. If there's something going on with the body, find a nutritionist, find a physical therapist, right? These types of people are there to help you and to ensure that this is not a functional thing before we go and we find a spiritual teacher and say, hey, I'm having all this chronic fatigue all this time and I'm crying all the time. It's like, well, have we investigated other possibilities first? And to be sure, there's all kinds of spiritual teachers, which I can touch on in a moment too. So I just really can't emphasize enough using everything and everyone at your disposal as a means of supporting yourself and supporting the healing work that you need to do. And that especially at the outset, if you're brand new to this and you haven't really worked on any of these layers before, going to these, what we would consider more traditional routes, is really helpful. It'll teach you a lot. You'll learn a lot. There's a lot to learn about being a human being. It's funny, we spend all this time living in these bodies, and yet a lot of times we don't really know much about how the body or the mind works. I mean, they're making amazing breakthroughs in neuroscience all the time, and we've been having human brains for as long as we've been alive as a species, and we're still just like scratching the surface. But that said, there's a lot of value that has been can be gained there, and there's a lot of things that have been discovered there. When we get into subtle energies, that's where someone like me can be useful to come to first, as well as some of the other people who are working in the world of metaphysical stuff and different types of psychics. One of the simplest things to kind of heal is people's fear of being able to see auras or feel spirits or sense energies in other people, those types of things. Because once somebody calms down and they allow it, it's no longer a big deal. But those are the types of things that if you go to a psychologist, now we're starting to get into some of the problems that arise and why I'm talking about this. But if you go to a psychologist and start saying, I can feel all these presences around me, some of them who aren't well versed enough in understanding energy and those types of things could confuse that as some sort of mental psychosis or whatever they would diagnose it as. And to be sure, there are legitimate mental issues where people are having some sort of mental health issue that's causing them to think that they feel things that they don't, that aren't actually there. But there are also quite a few people that are extremely sensitive to a different level of the world. They're sensitive to the spiritual world. And it's pretty consistent with anybody I've worked with that after they get over the fear, they're fine with it. It's not a big deal. It's not really causing any mental duress. The mental duress that's being caused is caused by the person's reaction to it. It's caused by the ego fear. So you dissolve that, there's no problem. Versus if somebody has a mental health issue, then they stay scared, sort of a thing, or they stay building up stories. That's been kind of my experience. I don't want to go into these things too much, but my experience with people who have a real mental health issue come my way is they're building lots of stories about a lot of different things. And there's a quality of disconnect, I suppose, between reality and perception. And that to me is definitely, something that's a mental health issue that somebody needs to be taken care of specifically. And this is a bigger disconnect than the usual ego disconnect. And that's just something that I've become sensitive to because of all the hundreds of emails I've looked at over the years. But as I said, the big key there with those sort of energy sensitivities that I've seen with so many people is once the person relaxes and allows, it's not a big deal. It's rarely anything so extreme as some sort of demon haunting someone. Usually the haunting feeling is the person's fear response. Lots of great healers are out there. And I just can't encourage you enough to be open to all of them. Certainly not all are as good as others. If you have one bad experience with a psychologist, don't write off all psychologists. Same with spiritual teachers. In the world of spiritual teachers, I often break us down into, let's say, 5 categories right now. A lot of what I call that first level of spiritual teaching is about protecting the faith. It's continuing a set of beliefs and practices and passing it on. So it's very much kind of that teaching of how to meditate, how to pray, how to talk about the Bible, anything along those lines. It could be with yoga, it's how to do yoga. I would definitely put some of the yoga teachers in that sort of level 1 spiritual teacher category, and they can teach you the functionality of the things, but they often miss the bigger picture. So as we kind of go up the levels of spiritual teachers, they tend to have a broader sense of what's really going on. And it's not just like an intellectual thing. So a lot of times the level 1 teacher is just kind of at one level of understanding. So the yoga teacher may really understand bodies and how to move them, but very light on intellectual and the heart and the energy stuff that moves at the deeper levels. The person who's teaching meditation could be very intellectual, just understands this and can understand a lot of suttas from different traditions that they're versed in. And that's where their understanding is. And as you kind of step up the chain, you get to kind of maybe a level 2 teacher that's had some sort of experiential understanding of truth. So that could be the yoga teacher who had some sort of heart opening while they're doing their yoga and wants to help other people move into those deeper spaces of understanding. Or it could be the meditation teacher now who's had a deep experience of loss of ego, of emptiness, of presence, and so helping people there. And then as you kind of go up, maybe we start to get into the level 3 where somebody's actually awakened and they're starting to see that whatever tool that you use is kind of irrelevant. And that also gives them more access to using more tools. And then level 4 is like even more integrated, where it doesn't really matter what they're doing. And the master level, which today is level 5, maybe in a while it'll be a different level number. I'm always making these up. But anyway, the master level, they just are. They can teach or not teach, it doesn't matter to them. They just are, and that presence is the teaching. And everything truly is open. Any different way they want to engage with somebody, they can use it. And they use it in integrity because they understand. Like they're fully released and relaxed into the present moment. They understand. Most people don't need to have a master come do any sort of special healing. And that's something about the ego that we have to be mindful of, is that occasionally it wants to go for the biggest. This is a very Western idea. The biggest will be best for me. I mean, you certainly can have somebody else who won't push themselves, and so they just keep sitting with the meditation teacher hoping something will heal itself inside, but they need to step further outside their comfort zone. So that can happen too. And this, once again, goes back to self-honesty. You have to be honest with yourself about the things you do know so that you can get the appropriate help working on things that perhaps you don't know about, as well as the things that you already know are issues and you need help and support with. Particularly with the spiritual teaching side of things and that sort of healing that goes on there, none of this is really ever about control or trying to make you do something. I think a good spiritual teacher can always explain to you what the tool is drawing, what it's drawing up, why you're feeling different things, versus somebody who doesn't understand, can't really explain it, or they start to give you very vague and useless answers. So let's say you're going to a sound healing, which has become kind of popular. It's a fun thing to go to. And particular tones and sounds are helping move things inside. And then you have like some big heart opening and you're feeling lots of emotions. And maybe you're feeling lots of sadness. And then you ask the practitioner about this and she doesn't know what to say, or she says it happens from time to time. It doesn't give you any further guidance in what to do with this heart opening space. And if it's really profound, you could be kind of a hot mess for a while and not know what to do with this. That's definitely a sign that this person doesn't fully understand the tools they're using. And it's probably time to find somebody else who can help you further. Because that'll happen from time to time, and this is part of moving mindfully through different healers at different points, that you may hit their ceiling, whatever they're capable of. Like I have my own limitations, and if somebody hits those limitations, it's best for me to say, hey, I think you need to find somebody who's going to be better suited to this issue. I think any good healer understands how to do that, because none of us have all the answers. None of us can take care of everything for you. I mean, there's some people I work phenomenally well with, and other people it just doesn't seem to arise. And that actually, I think, has nothing to do with either of us being right or wrong or having chosen badly in that connection. It's just not there. I don't know why. And so you let each other go. But the letting each other go is not a running away. And that's something, there's a link down below called Sabotaging Your Healing and Running When Things Get Tough. And I've seen that a ton. So with that particular situation, things are working. But usually with healing, because we have to feel to heal, you tend to feel a lot of uncomfortable things come out. When those uncomfortable things come out, a lot of people think, oh, something is going wrong. Or even if they know nothing's going wrong, they think there's got to be an easier way. Or there's some way that I can avoid this and be comfortable with this discomfort. But that's not how it works in my experience. In fact, the comfort seeking is probably one of the biggest problems for people who need to heal. We have a huge society belief structure set up around numbing. And as I said, you have to feel to heal. I say this over and over again. You have to feel to heal. It is so important to let that sink in, because in feeling these things, we can address them. We can see what the real issue is. And that further helps you to understand, oh, wow, I've got this deep, nauseated feeling in my stomach, to do with my mother. And I need somebody who understands that. And when you can describe that because you've been paying attention, you've been honest, then you can get responses and you can see if they understand what you're talking about. Whether you're talking to a spiritual teacher, a psychologist, or a doctor, since we're going with a sadness that feels like it has to do with mom in your stomach and nausea, then you're talking to the doctor and maybe they have no idea what you're talking about. Or you're talking to a psychologist, maybe they're more advanced. You're like, oh, okay, I know what's happening here, and so I can talk to you on that level. And another spiritual teacher has no idea at all because they just think you're supposed to meditate 9 times a day or something. So being able to allow yourself to feel is going to help you further in explaining to other people what the issue is and being able to assess the feedback you get from somebody else. Sometimes you're going to have to be persistent. Sometimes you're going to have a lot of these kind of introduction conversations with different people, different emails, different phone calls. And I can only encourage you to be persistent. Now, there absolutely is a lot we can heal on our own. But the tendency for most human beings is to stay stuck in your habitual patterns, whatever they may be. Your habitual patterns of holding your body, of sharing your heart, of speaking your mind. And without a little extra push and dedication to breaking those barriers down, most people don't go beyond them. A lot of healing bogs down because somebody does some good work and then they start to hit those harder issues and they don't want to let them go. So persistence in your healing work is just so vital. Going back to what I was starting off in the beginning, when you're paying attention to yourself and you're being honest, you're looking at your mind, your intellect. What are your thoughts? How do you think? What do you focus on when you think? What are the things that you want? A lot of times people are going to notice a lot of safety issues are part of how we think. Some people, it's more about desire and getting things. And then you start to notice your heart. What emotions do you even allow yourself to have? Is it easy for you to have emotions? Is it hard to have emotions? Some people are very shut down. If you're very emotionally shut down, then that's something you can relay to whatever healer you want to work with. Like, I need help learning to open my heart. If you're having lots of interesting body issues that you don't know, you go to a doctor to find out. You go to a physical therapist. You go to a nutritionist to make sure you're eating well. Eating well is a big deal right now in Western society. See, for millennia, we didn't have a choice what we could eat. It was like whatever was locally available, We ate it, so we survived. Well, now we have like a ton of options, but we're eating very poorly and we're sleeping very poorly. And a lot of those things can disrupt the body. So part of learning to be honest with yourself at times is going through certain levels of detox. If you want to be able to feel what's going on inside, you be able to accurately assess and understand how your body feels, how your heart feels, how subtle energy feels, especially subtle energy. Once we once we get into that, that's really amorphous. And we need to have all of our faculties available to correctly assess and interpret energy. Otherwise, we make really bad decisions and guesses, like the haunting example I gave earlier, or that fear that there's a demon after you, right? If somebody's so gunked up already, and then there's a lot of fear response in the ego, you're not going to interpret what you're feeling around you correctly. It may just be odd or different, the energy you're sensing, if you're sensitive in that way, and not bad, but everything else is so gummed up you can't see it properly. It's like seeing a really big shadow, let's say, and this huge thing is moshing along, and then when you finally pay attention, turn the spotlight of awareness, right, the light being that sense of being clear enough in yourself that you can see, it's just this cute little mouse, right, this little mouse running along, and you're like, I was scared of a mouse. So a certain level of purification at times through eating better, removing intoxicants, they just don't help. They get in the way. And we use intoxicants to numb ourselves predominantly, not because we're happy. Most people don't drink or use marijuana or do all these other things because they're happy. They're doing it because they don't feel good on some level. Cigarettes, like all that stuff. The more you can clear that stuff out of your system, the happier you're going to be, the easier you're going to be able to tell what's going on, and then you can relay that to other people. And so that's kind of the general overview I want to offer of getting to know yourself, being clear in your body so that you can correctly interpret things, and then talking to multiple healers about these things and seeing what they say back. Be willing to try different modalities, to step outside your comfort zone. And of course, you have to be willing to admit when there is an issue. Like that's a big blocker for a lot of people. Some people have so much pride or so much fear of accepting and acknowledging that there is an issue they need to deal with that they never even get to this part of choosing a healer. They just hope it goes away. And the fact of the matter is you can't hope things will just go away. It doesn't work that way. So these are some initial thoughts, and I welcome your questions. If you're just joining me, you can type a question to me about choosing healers in the chat pod here. As always, please be respectful to myself and to others and keep the questions and comments mainly focused to me because it's a small space. I also want to thank all my donors who support me. I'm so glad and so honored that you're willing to donate my way so that I can do this full time. If any of you would like to donate to help support me, there's a donation link down in the comment section below. The internet is a really great place too for finding so much wonderful information about healing in general. We're really lucky. I mean, look what we're doing right now. It's like having this ability to connect with people all around the world. From L'amour et la musique. Hi Jim, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts to share on spiritual abuse. If you've encountered people who have experienced what some of the contours of it from your perspective. Is there a particular type of abuse you want to talk about? If you want to scare the crap out of yourself, you can watch a movie called Holy Hell, because that's an amazing, amazing documentary about abuse of a spiritual teacher who was sexually abusing the men in the community. So, I mean, on that level, like something that's really an extreme case. So it just kind of depends what you mean by that particular term, spiritual abuse. For the most part, most people are pretty well-meaning in the world of spiritual healing and spiritual teaching. You're more likely to run across somebody who doesn't fully understand what they're doing than who's intentionally trying to abuse it. She's following up. I guess I was thinking specifically with respect to a healing relationship. As I said, it depends what you mean. I mean, if we start talking about relationships in general, like people can get confused about the connections that happen in those relationships, and clear boundaries are important to establish to help people understand what this relationship is. And that's kind of, a certain basic attachment thing that therapists have to deal with all the time to help people understand that, feeling close in this intimate space is normal and natural, but it doesn't mean that there's anything romantic. So there's that sort of abuse that can occasionally show up do people just get confused, and they're human beings. It's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but it definitely causes problems and gets in the way of healing. There's definitely plenty of people that are using their spiritual power to get millions of dollars to have ridiculous mansions and whatnot. They're definitely out there in the spiritual world. Also kind of generally an edge case. Generally speaking, most of us don't get into spirituality because we're going to make a lot of money. That's pretty rare. So those are kind of the initial abuses that come to mind. Does that help? Let me know. And thank you for the question. And anyone else just joining, feel free to post a question as and when something comes up. Healing is deep work, and a lot of times people are just not used to intimacy. Like, I occasionally bring this up for my students to remind them this is a very intimate connection. We're dropping into levels of sharing that some wives don't even do with their husbands, some husbands don't do with their wives, and they share with me. And the way the ego can be set up for a lot of people is like, if this is the deepest connection you've ever had, the tendency to want to attach to it and to potentially attach a romantic meaning to it can be very strong. And that has to do with the person's ego and the way society often looks at intimacy, that it doesn't understand we can have lots of different kinds of amazing intimate relationships. It's really awesome. And I'm very fortunate as a spiritual teacher. I have so many very deep and powerful, intimate connections with people, but it's not romantic. It's not sexual. And so even just using that word intimate, I know is a bit of a landmine because of all the sexual romantic things that people have attached to it. But by intimate, I just mean it's connection. It's powerful connection. In the space of oneness, you come more and more to the realization that we are all one. That is the most intimate of intimates, right? There's no difference between the two. There's no separation. And the more people let go of issues in sessions with me, it's like the deeper you go into connection, and it's very powerful. So being able to handle that sort of power is important for the practitioner, and this kind of starts to move a conversation into how the practitioner needs to be able to hold his or her own space. But basically what I can say for those who are seeking healing work, from healing support from other people, is appreciate the power of that intimacy and learn to just breathe and relax into it so that you can start to get used to a new way of connecting and just allowing it to be, and to be like, okay, this is another very deep level of connection I can have here, and I can have another deep connection here with my romantic partner. I can have a deep connection with a friend, and they're different types of connections. You're welcome. What other questions do people have? It's always fun as watching somebody really let go of pain, from the healing perspective. When somebody drops that out, the level of openness and clarity that comes is just beautiful. And of course, it's super beautiful for the person because it can feel like coming out from underneath a dark cloud, depending on the intensity of the issue. A lot of people feel like they're stuck under a dark cloud of self-hatred and pain for most of their lives. So the vocation of the healer is super important. As I said earlier, you have to feel to heal. And there's a courage that comes and is necessary with doing that. To say, okay, I know that setting this metaphorical bone is going to hurt. It's going to hurt. But it's worth it because I know I'll be able to walk. It is extraordinary how much pain and suffering people hold inside. That's something that's very common for anyone who's done a lot of healing work, and certainly for those who have a spiritual awakening and the healing kind of starts doing itself. They can just be stunned. It's like, how is this much pain inside me? I thought I was fine. And that ego perception that we were fine is part of the problem a lot of the time, because it can get stuck. It can get stuck in the space where it's unable to admit that there's a problem, that denial that I've mentioned already tonight. And if you can't allow yourself to see the problem, you cannot deal with it. It's like if there's a leaky pipe in your house and you just won't look at it. It's like, nope, I don't see any problem. Then the leak keeps going and you get rotting wood in your ceiling or your walls or wherever it is, and things start breaking down. And then there's mold, and the problem keeps getting worse. And in many respects, I feel like that's where we're at in the world of right now. Is there are so many leaking pipes that have been ignored for so long that things are breaking down in very unhealthy ways. And people are getting really upset. So we're at a time where doing healing work, I think, is more critical than ever before. We have more interactions thanks to the internet, and the population of the world is growing. And the more people get stuck in pain, the more they tend to lash out at themselves or at other people. People who are lost in pain act from pain, and they share pain. The more that we are healed and whole, the more we tend to act from kindness. It's not because people are bad. It's a lot of it. It's just they're hurt and they don't know what to do. So researching a lot of these different healing modalities can be really, really helpful for a lot of you. Once again, that leads towards being able to find the right healer, to understand what you are working on. The more you open your eyes to like your upbringing and whoever your caretakers were, a lot of people it's families, but not always. And sometimes it's extended families or even friends that could be bringing somebody along into this world and essentially teaching them how to be in this world and who they are. So you have to look at that. You have to look at the patterns you were taught. And that will often challenge your beliefs about your upbringing. Once again, the ego often wants to defend these and say, no, it was good, or it's that, or it's this. And then you see something else, and then you have to accept that. So when you start to see some of those patterns, that also further informs you about what you're going to have to do to help yourself, the types of questions you want to talk to, and topics you want to talk to a healer about. And I talked about how to heal repeating issues on my blog, so that's a good one to go find. But that's often a good time to find someone like me. Then I tend to work in the deeper layers. I like people to have been working on sort of the upper layers of the mind and the heart with other healers before coming to me, because where I go is more towards that body energy, the way we hold energy, hold emotion down in the body, and I access it just through relaxation. I help people relax into their bodies and allow things to arise. And that seems to really do an amazing job at getting at the roots of issues. A lot of people want to immediately jump to dealing with the roots of the issues, and I applaud that enthusiasm. But many times we need to start whacking down the tops of the trees and the brush that we're standing in to even see what we're looking at. If we're too crowded with a jungle of issues, we don't really know what's going on. So chopping our way down, we start to get a better sense of what this thing is and what we're pulling out of the ground. So once you kind of have a sense of what this is, coming to someone like me to heal at that deeper level is tremendously powerful. If somebody hasn't done the upper level work, their mind is often not ready to accept what they find. Their heart is not willing to express what they feel. And so it's kind of like you can draw something up and then it hits this upper ceiling and then pushes it right back down. And that feels even worse. Because now it's like you're partially bringing it up and then pushing it back down, and then you feel like you're getting nowhere. So getting into the body energy it's a little bit different than what I've seen a lot of other people who are trying to be energy healers do. Because there's something about, as I said, the way people can relax into themselves and you focus on an area of the body as you're breathing and relaxing, that something kind of moves up from a deeper level rather than just having someone try to kind of clear your energy centers or clear your aura or whatever. Some of that can be very superficial at times. So with more superficial healing like that, you can tell that that's what it's doing, because then it's like an hour, a couple days later, you just feel normal again. Like nothing really permanently changes. You may feel good for a little while and then it's gone. And that's fine, if that's what you want. If that's sort of what I call as a car wash. It's like if you're just getting your car washed, right? We all get our cars washed from time to time if we have them, and that's fine. It's not a big deal, but that's also part of understanding what a tool does. So getting more experience with different spiritual teachers and healers can be really, really useful to give you that perspective. And I really encourage you to notice what ones just work. And just work can be very powerful. It can be very upsetting. A lot of things can come out of somebody when a connection just works as it is. So part of being a patient, I suppose, somebody who's seeking healing, you have to be able to identify, wow, this really does work. A lot comes out of me. And I'm going to honor that this actually is a good match for me, even though it's uncomfortable. Sometimes you don't want as much to move. Sometimes it can be overwhelming that you want to work with somebody else through some of those top layers I was talking about, and then come back to the person who really does work and move that sort of energy for you. But the main problem I'm pointing to here, it tends to be that sort of self-sabotage, that this is too much, this is wrong, it shouldn't be this way, I shouldn't feel these things, and trying to run from it, or trying to blame the healer, saying that they've done something to you that was wrong. And in this case, no, it's just part of healing. If there's a lot of pain inside, then you kind of have to energetically vomit it up. And that's not an enjoyable thing. Some people are going to be just particularly good with you to help you do that. So if anyone who hasn't had a question wants to ask one, feel free to do so. This is kind of the Q&A part of the night. I've just been kind of free flowing along. And as I said earlier, I do these talks every 2 weeks. The next one's going to be at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, 2 weeks from today. I'm going to get into talking about this feeling lonely on the spiritual path and feeling disconnected. It's a very common particular issue, and I want to go into that into some depth. And then 2 weeks from then, I'll be back at the 6 p.m. Pacific time. And unless somebody has another question, I'm probably going to wrap up here. Once again, if you want to support me, donations are appreciated. Thanks to everyone who does donate. And there's a link down below. that you can go and you can make a donation. And if you want to send a different amount than what is available in the drop-down menu, feel free to just contact me and I can tell you what email address you can send to. And since it doesn't look like there's any other questions really forthcoming, the main thing I want to emphasize is healing ends. That when you do this sort of right work for you on the emotional and spiritual and mental levels, that ends. At the same point, there are some physical issues that are just things that we learn to allow in life that are just going to be part of our bodies. So while we obviously want to vigorously seek to heal the body anytime it's hurt, coming to acceptance is a big part of not suffering from the pain of the body. Because ultimately, pain is part of the body's experience in life, and suffering is our response to life itself and often to pain. But with dedication, a lot of things do heal. A lot of issues do go away, and some physical issues do go away because they were being caused by how we were thinking or how we were treating ourselves, how we were holding our emotions, different things going on with our subtle energy. And so there's a lot of amazing health we can tap into when we find the right healer. So on that note, thanks for all of your attention tonight. I wish you well. I wish you well in your healing journeys and your spiritual healing and your growth. And feel free to stay in touch through my blog, and I hope to have you back here in a couple of weeks. Once again, feel free to check out my blog at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. I'm Jim Tolles. Good night, everybody.